I want you to start this deep dive by closing your eyes for a second. We are going to do a little mental time travel.
Okay, I'm with you.
Picture one of the most famous characters in the entire canon of American literature. We are going back to the Mississippi River, to the wooden raft, and to Mark Twain's Adventures of Huckleberry Finn.
All right, I am there. I can almost see the muddy water.
Now focus on Jim. You probably remember him from high school English class as the superstitious, passive, kindly enslaved man who follows Huck along.
Right, speaks in that very thick, difficult-to-read phonetic dialect. He's the sidekick.
He is the sidekick. But here is the provocative thought experiment. What if that was all an act? What if the Jim, was actually a brilliant, literate philosopher who was wearing a mask the entire time?
What if he was just playing a role to survive?
Exactly.
It's a staggering question. It completely upends everything we think we know about that story. And honestly, it forces you to look back at the original text and just wonder what you missed.
It changes the texture of the classic entirely. And that is the premise of the book we are exploring today. We are talking about James by Percival Everett.
A retelling that takes the camera off Huckleberry Finn and swings it 180 degrees to show us the world through the eyes of the man who renames himself James.
And before we get too far down the river, we should probably set the stage properly for everyone listening.
We should. You are experiencing a unique two-host AI conversation powered by Google's Notebook LM for deeper, more dynamic book analysis.
And frankly, this book demands a dynamic analysis because it is an absolute powerhouse of a novel.
It really is. And to establish the credentials here, because I want you to know this isn't just some fun fan fiction retelling. James has been a critical juggernaut.
It won the 2024 Kirkus Prize, the 2024 National Book Award for Fiction, and the 2025 Pulitzer Prize for Fiction.
That's the trifecta, essentially. That is rare air for any novel.
Right, and even former President Barack Obama included it on his 2024 reading list. It is a book that has resonated on almost every level of the literary world.
So our mission for this deep dive is pretty clear.
We want to unpack how Everett gives agency to a character who was stripped of it for over a century. We need to look at how he uses language as a literal weapon and how he exposes the absolute absurdity of racial supremacy.
And I know we always try to avoid spoilers, but with a book like this, the ending is, well, it's crucial.
Don't worry, we are going to be very careful. We will not be spoiling the specific resolution or the final pages because, trust me, you want to experience those for yourself.
Okay, good. So where does the journey actually begin in this version?
It starts in a familiar place, Hannibal, Missouri. We find James, who is roughly 27 years old, enslaved by the widow Miss Watson.
But the stakes are raised immediately compared to the original. In Twain's version, Jim leaves because he overhears a conversation that he might be sold. It's a fear, but it's a bit abstract.
A bit abstract, yes. In Everett's version, the threat is visceral and heartbreakingly specific.
Right. He discovers he is to be sold to a new owner in New Orleans. And for anyone listening who might not be a history buff, we should probably clarify why New Orleans is such a trigger word here.
It's not just a change of address. Being sold down the river to New Orleans usually meant going to the sugar plantations,
which was often a death sentence due to the brutal working conditions. But even more immediately for James, it means permanent separation from his wife and his daughter.
The total destruction of his family.
So that is the inciting incident. It forces his hand. He isn't running on a whim. He is running to survive and to prevent his family from being torn apart.
Exactly. He escapes to Jackson's Island, which is straight out of the classic. But this is where we hit the first massive twist and honestly gave me chills when I read it. We need to talk about the language.
This is the hook that grabs you by the throat. It's the central mechanism of the book.
It really is. Everett reveals that James, and actually the other enslaved people in the community, are secretly fluent in perfect, articulate Queen's English.
It's a brilliant narrative device. It completely reframes the dialect we see in Twain's book, that difficult Missouri Negro dialect, not as a sign of ignorance, but as a carefully constructed defense mechanism.
It's code switching, essentially.
Exactly. Code switching is when a speaker alternates between two or more languages. Usually we think of it in modern terms, how you talk to your boss versus how you talk to your friends, but Everett dials it up to 11.
Here, it is a survival strategy. They only speak in that broken dialect when white people are present. It's a performance.
There is this specific scene that illustrates this perfectly, and it is surprisingly funny, but also deeply tragic. James is teaching his daughter, Rachel, how to speak incorrectly.
Yes, he sets up this hypothetical scenario about a grease fire in the kitchen.
Right, this scene is so vivid, he asks her what she would say if the mistress, Mrs. Holliday, started a grease fire. And Rachel, being a smart kid, initially answers in clear, proper English.
She said something like, "Madam, the stove is on fire," which makes total sense.
Of course. But James has to stop her. He corrects her immediately. He tells her, essentially, no, baby, you cannot say it like that.
If you sound too intelligent, you become a threat. You make the white people uncomfortable, and
Yeah.
that puts a target on your back. You have to say, "Lottie missum, looky there."
It is survival training.
Mm.
He is teaching her that her physical safety depends on her ability to hide her mind. It's devastating.
And this dynamic carries over into his partnership with Huckleberry Finn. When they meet on Jackson's Island, Huck has faked his own death to get away from his abusive father. Pap James steps into this role of protector.
But it is so complicated now, isn't it? It's incredibly layered.
In the original, they are just buddies on a raft. Here, James has to protect this boy while lying to him about who he really is. He becomes a father figure to Huck.
But he has to do it from behind the mask of the dumb slave.
Imagine the mental tax of that.
Hmm.
He has to manipulate situations so that Huck thinks Huck is coming up with the ideas. It creates this layer of psychological exhaustion that Twain never touched on.
Not at all. And while he is doing all that external work, his internal life is just exploding with activity. This was my favorite part of the character study.
When he is floating down the Mississippi, staring at the stars, what is he actually doing?
He is having imaginary debates with Voltaire and John Locke. He calls it the French philosopher in his mind.
It is such a fantastic contrast. You look at him and see a man in rags on a raft, but inside, he is dissecting Enlightenment philosophy. He is grappling with concepts of equality, liberty, the social contract.
And that choice of philosophers is so specific. John Locke wrote about natural rights, life, liberty, and property.
And James is looking at a system that treats him as property and deprives him of liberty, and he is using the logic of these white European thinkers to deconstruct the very system that enslaves him.
He isn't passive. He is an intellectual giant in chains. And he doesn't just keep it in his head. There is this recurring motif of the pencil and the notebook.
We have to talk about the pencil. It seems so small, right? A pencil stub. But in this context, it is contraband.
It is a weapon. For an enslaved person to write was illegal in many states. It was a capital offense in some contexts, because literacy is dangerous to a system built on subjugation.
But James is obsessed with it. He steals a pencil, a dangerous act, and eventually steals a notebook.
Later in the book, he talks about this idea that by writing his story, he is writing himself into being. That phrase really stuck with me.
It connects back to agency. Literacy here isn't just a skill, it is an act of rebellion, the ultimate assertion of humanity. He is documenting his existence in a world that tries to erase it.
It anchors the whole narrative. He is reclaiming his story from the people who claim to own him. It is existential.
That phrase, writing himself into being, is so powerful. Now, before we get into the wild middle section of the book, and trust me, the satire gets biting, we want to take a quick pause.
We do. And this is a great moment to mention mindful moments.
That's right. If you are enjoying this deep dive into complex literature, you should check out our YouTube channel. It is called Mindful Moments, and it offers AI-powered book analysis, summaries, and critiques just like this one.
The goal is to inspire reflection and rational thought in a world that moves pretty fast. It is a great resource if you want to gain knowledge quickly but thoroughly.
So check that out. But let us get back to the river, because James's journey takes a turn that is just, well, it's dripping with irony.
Oh, this section.
The minstrel
Show.
So in the original book, we have the king and the duke, those con men who take over the raft. They appear here too, and they are just as ridiculous. But in Everett's version, they do something unforgivable.
They sell James. And who they sell him to is, well, it's unbelievable. They sell him to a man named Daniel Decatur Emmett.
And for the history buffs listening, that name might ring a bell.
It should. Daniel Decatur Emmett was a real historical figure. He was the founder of the Virginia Minstrels and the composer of the song Dixie.
So let's unpack the irony here, because it is thick enough to cut with a knife. James, a black man, is sold to a white man who runs a minstrel show.
He is forced to join a troupe where he has to put on blackface makeup to perform blackness for white audiences.
Just think about the layers of that. You have a black man hiding his intelligence, putting on burnt cork makeup to look like a caricature of a black man to entertain white people who have no idea he is actually black.
It is the height of absurdity, and the danger is extreme. If the audience, or even the other troupe members, found out he was the real thing.
they would kill him. It exposes the artificiality of the whole racial system. The audience doesn't want reality, they want the caricature. They want the Jim from the stories, not the James who debates Voltaire.
And Emmett himself is such a fascinatingly hypocritical character. He claims to be anti-slavery, doesn't he?
He does. He prides himself on being a progressive Northerner. He treats James with a certain degree of courtesy.
But this is the key. He still buys James. He still holds him as bonded labor. He benefits from the very system he claims to oppose.
Everett is using this to show that even the good white people of the era were complicit. The hypocrisy is baked into the culture.
But this environment gives James an ally. We have to introduce Norman.
Norman is a fantastic character. He is another enslaved man, but he is light-skinned enough that he is passing as white within the minstrel troupe.
He's living a double life just like James, but from a different angle.
And when James decides he has had enough and escapes, Norman goes with him. And together, they come up with a scheme that is just. It is audacious.
It is a direct subversion of the economics of slavery. Norman, who looks white, pretends to be the master. James plays the role of the slave.
Norman sells James to a buyer, collects the cash, and then James escapes a few days later to meet back up with Norman. Then they go down the river and do it again.
They are literally stealing back the value of James's body. They are turning the system against itself to fund their freedom. It is brilliant.
But it is also so high risk. Every time James is sold, he is putting himself in the hands of a stranger who might chain him up or beat him, or worse.
And eventually, their luck runs out.
This leads us to the sawmill, and the tone shifts dramatically here. We leave the satire of the minstrel show and drop straight into horror.
This is where the reality of industrial slavery hits. They pull the con at a place called Henderson's Sawmill. But Henderson isn't like the other buyers.
The atmosphere there is brutal. James is warned by another enslaved man, Luke, about the dull tools.
That detail stuck with me. Dull tools. It implies that the owner doesn't even care enough to maintain the equipment, making the work incredibly dangerous.
It is a disregard for human life on an industrial scale. If you lose a hand, you lose a hand. They will just buy another worker.
Exactly. And it is here that the stakes become personal again. James meets a young enslaved girl named Sammy, and he realizes she is an immediate, terrifying danger.
The miller, the man in charge, poses a threat of sexual violence that is imminent, and this is a pivotal moment for James's character.
Absolutely. In a pure survival story, the logical thing, the smart thing, would be to cut and run. He has his plan with Norman. He could leave tonight.
But he looks at Sammy and decides, no, not her.
It is a rejection of the survival at all costs mentality. He decides that his freedom cannot come at the expense of leaving her behind.
He initiates a rescue attempt. It involves James, Norman, and Sammy trying to flee this fortified, brutal camp. The tension in these chapters is just suffocating.
And we won't go into the details of the outcome of that escape because it is something you need to read to understand the full weight of.
But I will say it is a defining moment. It hardens James. It crystallizes his resolve. It is the moment where he realizes that just running isn't enough. He has to fight.
And this leads us to how Everett handles the ending structure of the book. If you remember Huckleberry Finn, the ending is, well, it is controversial.
That is putting it mildly. Literary critics have argued about the ending of Huckleberry Finn for a century. Ernest Hemingway famously said, you have to stop reading at a certain point because the ending is cheating.
Right. In Twain's book, Tom Sawyer shows up and turns Jim's imprisonment into a game. He makes Jim dig holes with spoons, write messages on plates.
Sleep with spiders and rats. He treats Jim's life like an adventure novel, even though Jim is actually free the whole time and Tom knows it.
It turns Jim into a prop. It's infuriating to read today. It strips Jim of his dignity right at the finish line.
And Everett clearly felt the same way because he takes a scalpel to the narrative structure.
He does more than that. He performs an amputation. He completely removes those final 12 chapters of Twain's book. He deletes Tom Sawyer's rescue scheme entirely.
In James, there is no game. There is no waiting around for white boys to save the day.
Instead, the narrative pivots. The Civil War is looming in the background, the cannons are starting to fire, and James takes direct action.
He stops being the passenger in his own story. He goes on a mission to rescue his own family, his wife and daughter.
It shifts the genre entirely. We go from a picaresque adventure to a high-stakes thriller or even a war novel. James is moving through a country that is tearing itself apart.
And he's willing to tear it apart himself if that is what it takes to get his family back. The passivity is gone.
This really brings us to the core themes. We've talked about language, but really this comes down to identity. The difference between Jim and James.
Names have power. Jim is the name given to him by his owners. It is the name associated with the mask with the yes master, no master persona.
James is the name he chooses. It is the name of the man who reads Locke, who protects his children, who outsmarts con men. When he finally reclaims that name, it is a declaration of sovereignty.
And that contrast leads to the theme of agency. Twain's Jim is a character who things happen to. He is sold, he is hunted, he's freed.
Everett's James makes things happen. He plots, he writes, he fights if he has to.
And that agency is rooted in his role as a father. We talked about his biological children, but we also have to look at his relationship with Huck. That paternal bond is the emotional anchor.
It is. He's trying to break the cycle of violence and ignorance, not just for his own kids, but for Huck, too. He wants to save Huck from becoming another Pap, another Henderson.
He sees the potential in the boy, even if the boy is part of the system that oppresses him. It is a heavy burden to carry.
It is. Thinking about this book, it is amazing how it manages to be so many things at once. It is a satire, a thriller, a philosophy textbook, and a deeply emotional family drama.
It really is. And it brings us back to that idea of the silenced voice we started with. We think we know these classic stories. Huckleberry Finn is a pillar of American culture.
But Everett reminds us that every story has blind spots. Every story has characters standing in the background, holding a spear or carrying a tray, who have entire universes inside their heads that the author never bothered to ask about.
It's a question that changes how you see the world. Percival Everett didn't just rewrite a book. He corrected a historical narrative.
He gave the pencil back to the person who should have had it all along.
That is the provocative thought I want to leave our listeners with today. When you read history, or even when you watch the news, ask yourself, who is wearing the mask? Who is speaking the dialect because they have to?
And what would they say if they could drop the act and speak freely?
It is a question that forces you to think critically about who controls the narrative.
Well said.
Listen, if this conversation sparked something in you, and I hope it did, please check out the link on your screen for the in-depth book analysis. We barely scratched the surface of the plot twists and the writing style.
Definitely. Subscribe, share, and if you can, purchase the book via the link. It is worth your time. And most importantly, keep thinking rationally.
And don't forget to check out the many genre-based book podcasts available at Mindful Moments. Nourish your mind on the go. Thanks for diving deep with us today.
We will see you on the next one. Goodbye, everyone.